feels like there's something in here watching me, man.
Something's been through here just recently.
Can you smell that? That's pretty strong.
A man who went hiking in the forests of Washington recorded the scariest video of Bigfoot.
So when they tell us they've seen video they think is legit, we take a look too.
His camera caught something no one was ever meant to see. Bigfoot, up close, clear, and more terrifying than any blurry photo before. But why did he refuse to speak about what happened right after? Tune in, because the truth behind these images will force the President of the US to send military support right away. The night something stared back at him. Welcome back to the Cryptid Report. The cabin was supposed to be a place of peace, a retreat from the noise of everyday life. Tucked deep in the woods, it offered nothing but silence, the kind that makes a person feel either comforted or completely exposed. On the second night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the fire cast strange shadows on the walls, he felt something. Not a sound, not a movement, just a shift in the air, an invisible pressure that sent a warning straight to his gut. Then he saw it, a handprint, large, pressed into the frosted glass of his window from the outside, and just beyond the light, a face emerged from the darkness. Before we dive into this, one thing is certain. What he saw that night was only the beginning, and the truth hiding in those woods is far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't human, hair-covered, massive, and with eyes that seemed to hold their own faint glow. It was watching him, not like a curious animal, not like a lost wanderer, but something that knew it had been seen, something that wasn't afraid. Heart pounding, he grabbed his phone. The first shots were shaky, blurred. His hands weren't steady, but he knew he had to keep trying. Flash after flash, the creature didn't move. It just stared, almost as if it was letting him document the moment. And then, gone. Just like that, it melted back into the night, leaving behind only its lingering presence and the weight of something unnatural pressing against his chest. He didn't sleep. Every sound outside became a threat, every creak of the cabin a reminder that he wasn't alone. As dawn broke, he looked through his photos. Some were nothing more than shadows, but a few made his stomach turn. The shape, the size, the way those eyes seemed to pierce through the screen. This was real. He knew he had proof of something the world wasn't ready to accept. Uploading the images wasn't easy. He didn't want to be the next laughingstock, another crazy person shouting about monsters in the woods. But he couldn't keep this to himself. Using an anonymous account, he shared the pictures with online communities dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The reaction was immediate. Believers were in awe. They called it the best evidence yet, proof that Bigfoot wasn't just a legend, but something walking among us. Skeptics, of course, tore it apart. They examined every pixel, accusing him of trickery, of Photoshop, of anything that would make this not real. But there was one thing no one could deny: the sheer size and structure of whatever was in those photos. It didn't match any known animal. And the strangest part? The glow in its eyes. No known species had eyes like that. This wasn't an isolated incident. Washington has long been a hotspot for Bigfoot sightings, stretching back hundreds of years. Indigenous tribes have spoken of the Sasquatch for generations, describing it as a guardian of the forest, a force to be respected. Modern encounters have been just as chilling. Take the case of a woman named Barb. As a child, she had heard whispers of creatures in the woods, but as an adult, she had an experience that changed her life. She found a massive footprint outside her home, deep and clear in the dirt. Then, strange things started happening. Trees snapped at unnatural heights. Heavy footsteps echoed in the night. And then, she caught something on camera, a shape shifting in and out of visibility. Something was watching her, something that didn't move like anything she had ever seen. Then there's Joseph. Hiking in Olympic National Park, he and his girlfriend saw something they could never forget. A massive orange-haired figure carrying fresh prey. The creature turned its head toward them, and in that moment, they felt something primal: fear. The kind that doesn't come from simple surprise, but from a deep, instinctive knowledge that they were staring at something that shouldn't exist. Their dog, once fearless, never acted the same again. The stories go on and on, the footprints, the eerie howls, the glimpses of something too fast and too large to be human. Yet for every account, there's someone ready to dismiss it, calling it folklore, exaggeration, or an outright hoax. But if these are just stories, why do they all share the same details? The height, the shape, the eyes that seem to glow in the dark. Some thought his photos were fake, but others knew the truth. Something big was out there, and it had been for a very long time. The night the forest came alive. Skeptics argue there's no solid proof, no clear video, no perfect evidence that science can't debunk. But what if the best proof isn't a body or a sample? What if it's the sheer consistency of the encounters, the undeniable weight of hundreds, if not thousands, of people saying the same thing? The deep woods hide things that most people will never see, and some of those things don't want to be found. There's something out there, something huge, something strong enough to snap trees like toothpicks. Back in the spring of 1992, Barb was just exploring the woods near her cabin when she noticed something strange. Treetops broken clean off, too high up for any human to reach. It wasn't wind, and it sure wasn't animals. Whatever did this had power beyond anything normal. Her curiosity pulled her deeper into the woods, where she found something even more unsettling: a footprint. This wasn't some smudge in the dirt or an oddly shaped patch of ground. This was real, clear, and massive. Something heavy had stepped there, pressing deep into the earth, leaving behind a shape that looked almost human, but far too big. And that was just the beginning. Barb couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to something she wasn't meant to see. Every discovery led to more questions. Who or what was making these prints? Then things got even weirder. One evening, she heard something crash onto her cabin roof, a heavy, dark object falling from the trees above. When she went outside to check, there was nothing. No bird, no branch, no sign of anything that could explain the noise. It was as if something had thrown it, or maybe something had jumped away before she could spot it. And just when she thought it couldn't get any stranger, she caught something on camera. It was 2012 when Barb finally saw it with her own eyes. She was watching elk move through the trees when something else moved behind them, a shadow, almost blending into the forest. It wasn't a person, and it wasn't an animal she could recognize. For a split second, she captured it on video, but just like that, it was gone. The footage wasn't perfect, but it was enough. She wasn't alone out there, and she wasn't the only one with a story to tell. Other people had seen it too. A couple hiking through the Olympic Peninsula described a massive, orange-haired figure crossing their path, their dog, usually fearless, trembling in terror. The description matched what Barb had seen. People talked about eerie calls echoing through the trees, strange structures made from twisted branches, even glowing eyes staring from the darkness. It was as if something big and smart was living in those woods, staying hidden just out of reach. Barb became obsessed, chasing every lead, every clue. Skeptics scoffed, but she didn't care. The evidence was piling up, and she knew she was onto something real. The forest stretched on for miles, and who knew what was still waiting to be found. But as strange as her discoveries were, they were nothing compared to what lay in another part of the world, a place even more terrifying. Portlock, Alaska, is not the kind of place people like to talk about. This isn't just another abandoned town. It's a place soaked in fear, where entire settlements disappeared, not once, but 4 separate times. What could force people to leave their homes again and again, leaving behind everything they owned? The answer isn't simple, and what little we do know is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Back in the late 1700s, British explorer Nathaniel Portlock landed there. He found untouched wilderness, plenty of fish, wild game running free. It should have been paradise. But there was something off. An entire native village stood empty, as if its people had vanished into thin air. The buildings were intact, the supplies still there, but no one was left. There were no signs of a battle, no wreckage, no bodies, just silence. People had seen strange things before, but in one town, whatever was lurking didn't just scare people, it made them leave forever. A town abandoned 4 times. Portlock's crew settled in anyway, thinking they had found a perfect new home. But then it started. Strange illnesses spread among them. Not just sickness, but something worse. An overwhelming fear, something that made grown men afraid to sleep at night. The crew begged Portlock to leave. He listened, and they abandoned the place, never looking back. But they weren't the first to feel that fear. 6 years before, Spanish explorers had come to the same place. They found the same empty village and made the same mistake. They stayed. Before long, the sickness hit them too. But it wasn't just the fear. At night, they heard noises, low growls, footsteps crunching through the underbrush, whispers of something moving just beyond the firelight. Whatever it was watching them. And just like the British crew, they ran, leaving everything behind. For almost a century, Portlock stayed empty. Then, in the 1860s, a group of Sugpiaq natives tried again. They were tough, used to harsh lands, and they wanted to make the area work. At first, it seemed like they might. The fish were plentiful, the land was good, and they were ready to settle in for good. But history has a way of repeating itself, and whatever haunted that place wasn't gone. These weren't just rumors or fleeting shadows. The creatures were massive, powerful, and hungry. When animals were easy to find, the attacks stopped. But when the forests ran empty, the monsters came looking for fresh meat, human meat. Again and again, the villagers fought back, but they were no match for these unstoppable hunters. The only way out was to leave, abandoning everything they had built. By 1905, Portlock was empty, left as a warning for anyone who might think of settling there again. Fast forward to 1921, and another group arrived, determined to succeed where the first had failed. The Alutiiq people brought industry, schools, and even a post office, transforming Portlock into a bustling town. But they weren't ignorant of the past. They knew what had been lurking in the woods, the massive creatures called the Nanook, half man, half beast, a shadow in the night that no one wanted to see. To keep themselves safe, they set strict rules: no wandering at night, armed guards at all times, and never, ever venturing too deep into the forest. For a while, it worked. The town grew, people felt safe, and life in Portlock seemed normal. But time has a way of making people forget. By the late 1920s, the rules loosened. Curfews were ignored. The woods didn't seem so dangerous anymore, until the horror returned. In 1931, a logger named Andrew Kamluck went too deep into the trees. He never made it back alive. What his friends found defied reason. His head was crushed. His sled, far too heavy for any man to lift, had been thrown yards away, and his dogs were ripped apart. Whatever had attacked him wasn't human. It wasn't just an accident. It was a message. Fear spread like wildfire, but nothing could prepare the town for what came next. Thomas Larson, a seasoned hunter, spotted something on the beach, a giant, covered in thick, dark hair, standing like a man but towering over anything human. He raised his rifle but couldn't pull the trigger. The thing stared at him, unbothered, then vanished into the woods. That's when people realized the monster wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was watching them. Then the disappearances started. Hunters and fishermen vanished without a trace. Those who were found had wounds so brutal they didn't look like they came from any normal animal. Bodies were pulled from the bay, mauled beyond recognition. Fear gripped Portlock, and people tried to fight back with more guards, more guns, more rules. But none of it worked. By 1950, it was too much. One by one, the townspeople packed up and left. It was an overnight exodus. Every home abandoned, every building left to rot. Only a post office worker stayed behind, but even he couldn't handle the silence or the footsteps that echoed in the empty streets at night. He left soon after, leaving Portlock to whatever claimed it in the first place. Decades passed, but Portlock's ghosts never left. Hunters who dared enter the abandoned town told the same eerie stories. Something followed them, unseen but always there. Heavy footsteps in the brush, deep, guttural growls that seemed to come from nowhere. And then there were the tracks. In one case, hunters found footprints nearly 20 inches long. They led to a clearing where a moose had been killed, but the moose's tracks ended there, as if something had picked it up and carried it away. The footprints, though, kept going, straight into the mountains. The town was empty, but those who dared to return still felt it watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. What they saw made them leave forever. Skeptics rolled their eyes, saying it was just bears. But bears don't crush sleds or rip people apart. Bears don't leave behind footprints that look human, just massive. And bears don't make entire towns disappear. The Alutiiq elders never doubted what had happened. To them, the Nanook was no legend. It was real. It was smart. It was deadly. And it was still out there. Even today, those who pass through Portlock do so carefully, following the old rules, never staying too long. Because whatever lived in those woods back then, it might still be watching. In the year 1973, 3 hunters took shelter in an abandoned town deep in the Alaskan wilderness. The night was cold, and the wind howled through the empty buildings, but it wasn't the wind that kept them awake. Something moved outside their camp, circling them in the dark. They could hear low growls, strange garbled noises, sounds that sent chills down their spines. Then came the heavy footsteps, slow at first, then quicker, stronger, heavier. It wasn't walking on 4 legs like a bear. It walked like a man. But no man should sound like that. The hunters clutched their rifles, staring into the shadows, but whatever was out there never stepped into the light. By dawn, they packed their things and left, never daring to return. Years passed, and people still avoided that place. Then, in the 1990s, another hunter, young, strong, and fearless, went deep into the woods near Portlock. He knew the stories but didn't believe them. That changed when something started chasing him. He never saw it. He never knew how close it got. But the sound of its footsteps thundered behind him, keeping up no matter how fast he ran. They were not just heavy. They were impossibly fast, closing in on him but never striking. He barely made it back to his boat, heart pounding, breath ragged. To this day, he refuses to speak about what happened. He only says one thing: "I'll never go back there." But the most chilling story comes from the year 1990. A paramedic was working in a nearby town treating an elderly Alutiiq man. They spoke about many things, but when the paramedic mentioned hunting near Portlock, the old man's expression changed in an instant. His face drained of color, his hands trembled, and without warning he grabbed the paramedic by the shirt. His eyes, wide with terror, locked onto the younger man's. "Did you see it? Did it bother you?" The words came out desperate, as if he was pleading for answers. Whatever had once lurked in Portlock had never left the old man's mind. Even after decades, the fear was still there, fresh, raw, alive. Some say it's just old folklore, stories meant to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But can stories explain why an entire town packed up and left without looking back? Can they explain the torn-apart bodies, the bloodied remains, the hunters who still vanish without a trace? Others believe there's a more scientific answer, something called infrasound. It's a low-frequency sound wave that can cause overwhelming fear, confusion, and even hallucinations. Tigers use it to paralyze their prey before attacking. If animals can use it, what else might? Could whatever lives in Portlock have the same ability? It might explain the fear, but it doesn't explain the bodies. Infrasound doesn't crush skulls. It doesn't leave deep claw marks in human flesh. Another theory? There's something out there in the dense forests and towering mountains of Portlock, something ancient, something that has never forgotten that this land was once its hunting ground. It doesn't see humans as neighbors. It sees them as prey. Maybe that's why no one stays in Portlock. The town may be abandoned, but the stories haven't stopped. The fear hasn't faded. And whatever drove people away in the first place, it might still be there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to stay too long. Is this the clearest proof that Bigfoot is real, or is there something even stranger hiding in the forests, something the world isn't ready to believe? Could these terrifying images be the final piece of evidence, or is there a reason some want them buried forever? Tell us what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.